Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Mark Prater podcast, where our aim is to connect our global family of churches with our executive director. Mark, as we continue to navigate through this pandemic as pastors, carrying various burdens, hearing a diverse collection of voices and perspectives from our church, what thoughts, what suggestions would you have to encourage us to prepare our hearts and our minds as we communicate to our churches?
Yeah, it's a good question I've been thinking about because I think our pastors are feeling the need to communicate effectively and consistently
Yeah,
to their church, knowing that their members have different comfort levels and different perspectives regarding the pandemic and how reopening should even occur.
right.
So I think a pastor has to kind of do work in his own heart first so that it affects the tone of his communication and do some thoughtful theological work that
Yeah.
informs what he does communicate.
So, what kinds of ways might you suggest some approaches to think about preparing our hearts in that way to be theologically informed and ready to communicate in that way?
Yeah, I would. Here's what I would recommend: as you sort of just listen to all of the noise out there. One of the things that I've had just a growing concern about is more of a cavalier attitude that people
Mm,
bring towards this, and I don't think
yeah,
that should mark God's under shepherds. I think the place to start for us as pastors is First Peter 5:5, where Peter is writing to elders, and he says there, "Clothe yourselves." Then he adds that phrase, "all of you,
mm,
with humility toward one another, because God opposes the proud and gives grace to the humble." So we should wear humility in that sense. And I'm not talking about weakness when I say humility.
right.
I'm talking about humility that also includes a Christ-like strength. And I think our humility must begin vertical so that we are men who fear God in this. And that's a part of Romans 13, actually,
Yeah,
that
big
we're
part.
called to follow civil authorities because there is a judgment seat that awaits us that we have to give an account for. Just that fear of the Lord should engender and should stir humility in us.
Yeah. I mean, I'm working through that text right now, and it just is clear that even if we agree or disagree about the application of what it means to submit to the government, because there's certainly situations where we won't,
Right.
and where that is, people might have different perspectives on that. Whole respect and honor must be present in the middle of all of that. I think speaks to exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's that that's the tone of a pastor's communication.
Hmm.
Is one of humility, clarity, theological clarity in particular, discernment, and yet strength. And so I think take time to just to wrestle with your own heart
Yeah,
and make sure that you're pursuing Christ-like humility. That's the place to start.
that's great counsel. Preparing the heart. When it comes to preparing the mind, um, any resources that you might recommend for to aid our thinking?
Yeah, as recommend resources, let me just say this, and I want to keep saying this over and over again because these are my thoughts.
Right.
I'm on the leadership team, and so guys interpret them as leadership team thoughts, which is understandable. Um, every situation is going to be different locally.
Yeah,
That's
for
because
sure.
that different governors in the states anyway are making different decisions, and even within states, different county commissioners are making different decisions. So it really depends
Right.
on what's happening locally, and it also depends on your church. You know your church best, so make decisions that are best for your church. So these are just thoughts. These are not
Yeah.
mandates in
Should
any
be
way.
understood. Everyone,
Right.
hopefully, we all understand. Hopefully, everyone watching understands. This is a podcast to help us understand what's going on in Mark's mind and heart and
Right.
encouragement. These are suggestions,
Right. Exactly.
and you may differ
Exactly.
in your perspective.
Yeah. I think one of the most, well, first of all, I would do what you're doing, study Romans 13. I think that's a good place to start. Make sure you've got a good theological baseline on just what Scripture says there.
Yeah.
A helpful resource I found was Jonathan Leeman's article where he wrote, I forget the title, but when should churches ignore guidelines and engage in civil
It's on the Nine
disobedience. I
Marks
thought it was,
website, I think,
yeah,
so you can find it
it
there.
is. Yeah, exactly. He sets it up. There's the government's responsibility basically to protect life. That's one of the God-given mandates. You see that throughout Scripture,
Yeah,
which is in play right now during a pandemic, and that meets with the church's freedom and obligation to gather together. Certainly here in the States, and so how
right.
does a church think about that? He gave a couple of really good thoughts, which I'll give to you. Um, is the government presenting a reasonable argument to protect life?
Hmm.
And if they're presenting a reasonable argument to protect life, I think you've really got to consider that
Right.
and follow that. However, if they begin to be unreasonable, then you've got to ask the question: do we have to follow those guidelines?
That's right.
The other one that he said, which I thought was really good, is the government at all singling out churches and preventing them from meeting? So if they're opening up all different other kinds of venues, like big concerts and certainly obviously malls and shopping malls and that kind of thing, and they're still restricting churches,
Yeah.
that would be another occasion where you've got to wrestle through, do we meet anyway?
Yeah.
But I think what we're finding overall is there's no, at least in the States, I'm not aware of any mandate that's keeping a church from preaching the gospel right now.
Yeah.
You can do that live stream. You can do that, through video, through other means. They are giving guidelines for gathering, depending on the state. You and I were talking earlier here in Pennsylvania, churches could gather.
Yeah.
They're
Legally.
just recommending that they don't,
Right.
right? So
So,
again, it's a local issue.
yeah. So yeah, great thoughts. And I think there's, in the middle of all of this, there's a lot of gray for us to navigate through as pastors. There's wisdom calls, and your exhortation to be thinking theologically and also be processing this humbly is a helpful one. So thank you, Mark. And thank you, everyone, for watching the podcast. And we'll see you again right here soon.
Thank you for watching. If you have questions or comments, Mark would love to hear from you. For more videos like this, hit subscribe on YouTube or by email at markkprater.com.